Okay, we're live, apparently. Let's go.
We are.
Hello.
Yeah, we got the notification for it.
Nice, nice. Hello, Nick. Hello, Mick. Mick just joined. Let me figure out how to invite people, because last time I forgot to share copy link.
I could write a message too. Hello, world.
Hello, let's go, Mick. All right. So, for anyone who doesn't know who we are, um, my name is Ioan. People call me Speed. I'm trying to be the Actionsmith. It's a work in progress. You can learn more about that on actionsmithing.com and my Substack, and you can subscribe and read and stuff. And I'm having a nice conversation today with Nick Serpico. Hope I said that right.
Yes, you
Who is
did.
a wonderful modern philosopher and aspiring polymath. And we're going to be talking about polymathy today, or the universal man, the Renaissance man, whatever you want to call it, and some history, some various things that are polymathy like. But do you let us know who you are? What do you do? How do you help people?
I mean, I've never been called a modern philosopher before, but I'll take it. We could go with that. I've been calling myself a strategist very vaguely.
Mm.
Um, I guess what I'm doing at the moment is project managing the Future Proof Creator Summit in Vancouver. That's going to be next June, although I'm in New Jersey. Jesse's in Vancouver over there.
Jesse
And
Barber.
yeah. And I'm trying to build out my personal brand to kind of get a good sense of it. But the ethos behind that is basically pushing people to establish behavioral agency in their life, meaning you have conscious control over your physical, mental, emotional activity, actions, your behavior, basically. Um, it's funny. I don't. Oh, the next one is to. I'm going to check. It's in the little mind blade thing. I should remember it. Let's see. Going to my own about page. That's why it's there. Oh, it's to establish behavioral agency, exercise human potential, and then establish that potential into the world.
Hmm.
It's basically the ethos behind what I'm trying to do, and that's very all encompassing. If you
Yeah. I
think
mean, it's
about it,
it's very close to what I'm doing. I'm
yeah,
just
I've
using
noticed.
action as the lens for it, but it's all about self actualization in the end, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm looking to help people enact their vision and transform reality towards what they're trying to accomplish, and you're looking to do the same, just with potential and the mind, right?
yeah, I
And
think it's all very connected.
yeah, what do you say about sharpening the mind?
Sharpening the mind. Well, it's funny because that name Mind Blade came because I, for a couple years, as I was learning kind of how to sell basic freelance services and things like that from maybe 2020 to like 2023, 2024, I tried to develop something I was calling basic business framework. And it was
Mhm.
like, I had a couple variations of that. It was like, brand and then marketing and then deliver, fulfillment and advertising. And I had a whole bunch of configurations to try to kind of simplify it. And recently when I was writing the thing I mentioned to you, the purpose playbook, in
Yeah.
the third part of that, I realized I could just take basic business framework and put it in there, but it still didn't make sense as a framework. And I don't remember exactly what triggered this thought, but I was talking to one of my mentors and I basically just asked him because he's a crazy, phenomenal salesman. It's like the stereotypical 1970s,
Mm.
it could sell ice to the Eskimos. I was at a lighting expo with him once in New York, and there was someone there he knew. He's like, this guy could sell someone a dead roach, and it's true. He's very charismatic. And I said, how do you sell anything to anyone? If you had to sell anything to anybody, what do you need? And he said, listen, if you want to sell something to anybody, something to somebody, you need two things, and without those, you're not going to get anywhere. He said the first is enrollment, which means compelling value to others. And the second is you need to ask them questions because if you don't ask them questions, you don't know what they want. You can't compel the value to them.
Mhm.
And that reflected, maybe five or six things I've heard people say something like adjacent to that a bunch of times. Like there's an Alex Hormozy reel where he says that the best salesman doesn't even make any statements; they only ask you questions, right? And so I looked up books on questions because I'm like, let me check this out. And there was a really good quote in one. The name of the book was called "A More Beautiful Question"
Hmm.
by what's his name, Warren Berger, because I want to make sure I cite him for this. And he had a great quote in the beginning of that book where he said, "Questions are how we wrap our mind around what we don't know."
Right.
And it made me think of a sort of phrasing that questions are effectively the blade of your mind.
Hmm.
Now, it might be a multi-dimensional blade, but it's questions are like your first resource when you don't have anything. And I remember this, I was sort of directing it at the ideal client, the customer avatar
Hmm.
template. And I realized like, well, you can't describe an idea. You can't define your ideal client if you haven't had any clients. You can project one, right? But the
Yep.
idea being you actually shouldn't be trying to project or speculate answers to those questions. You can actually just ask people and get the answers to those questions,
Right.
and now you have a viable working thing. And so how to sharpen the mind, I think, would mean by that in a long-winded way, asking better questions.
Hmm. Very, very interesting. I have a quote that I can't attribute, but I'm gonna say it's inspired by Feynman, which is average thinkers collect answers, great thinkers collect questions. Yeah. And
Yeah,
it's in the essence of, being comfortable with not knowing, because you don't have to know everything and you just have to ask the right questions and you're going to find out little by little more and more. But the more you ask, the more you understand how much you don't know. And the smarter you get, the more knowledgeable you get, and the more you become a polymath and you dabble into different
yes,
domains
yes.
of knowledge, yeah, different disciplines, etc. You're just going to expand the amount that you're not knowing. Yeah. So it's important to be comfortable with not knowing and to not be afraid of it, to not be frightened by it. And that's what makes you into a great thinker, in my opinion.
Yeah, you need to because that's where all the potential is, and that's why we sometimes hear these quotes about how, the amount of uncertainty you're able to handle is kind of proportionate to how much you grow,
Mhm.
because that uncertainty is not knowing. But that
Right.
not knowing, I've kind of analogized before sometimes as empty space. So, it won't
Potential.
feel right, exactly. Now, and I think also people mistake intensity for discomfort.
Mhm.
Or even immensity in this case. Like if you recognize this, if you ask a very big question,
Mhm.
you can all, it's much easier to shoot it down and just like destroy the premise of the question than it is to try to answer the question in a meaningful way. So now on the is it pronounced polymathy?
I have
Polymathy?
no idea. Let's not
We'll
worry about it.
interchange them.
Yeah, yeah. Let's call it a universal man. That's
Yes,
so.
because this morning we discovered something very interesting. Because I made a little AI prompt to kind of backtrack the history of whatever term you give it from like its
Mhm.
first appearance to, now. And I realized a theme. I typed in polymath and I noticed a theme that a lot of the quote polymath stuff was something we could term practical polymathy or necessary even just to execute a task. And I know you mentioned something adjacent to that today, like craftsmen.
Yeah, artisans.
Yeah. So that's an interesting concept because today polymath is almost seen as like a quirky generalist jack of all trades thing. But if you go back to certain points, it's actually was just almost a prerequisite to,
Yeah, a constant
you know,
of being human, to be
right,
honest.
right, right.
Yeah, the way I see it, so generalism in general is a constant. We are all generalists. Okay, we all like look at even the most specialized Olympic athlete, yeah, and they
Mhm.
read books and they dabble in other disciplines and they're intelligent people or they can do other things, right? We're not robots specialized on a particular task. So
No.
we're all on a spectrum, more or less generalists. So the polymath isn't necessarily someone who is a generalist in essence. It's just someone who has accepted that they can pursue mastery in more directions at once, and they can synthesize from multiple different areas of expertise, but a greater whole. Um, but I think we all have that capacity, and we all do that to various extents. It's just a matter of how intentional we are about it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the famous polymaths, which usually I mean, Leonardo da Vinci is the one that'll pop up a lot if you
Yeah.
search for it, but a lot of them are as an interesting tangent to Leonardo da Vinci. It's sort of starting to maybe tie in the polymath with these sort of I would consider, using your terminology, Leonardo da Vinci an actionsmith
Mhm.
by label. I think that's probably fitting, if you'd agree.
Yep.
Um,
I have a great list of actionsmiths that I compiled today. So I'm doing the research and the work for my next essay, which will be about what the actionsmith actually is as an archetype.
right, right.
Yeah.
Okay, I like it. I like it. But so then we'll take Da Vinci for the moment. And one thing people don't realize, so I was asking the AI this, these guys like Da Vinci or Galileo or there was one more, like Nikola Tesla, although
Mhm.
this doesn't apply. This is what the point I'm about to make doesn't apply to him as much. People don't realize they were essentially businessmen. They were
Yeah.
essentially entrepreneurs. But you're taught about them in school like they were these mythical geniuses who just kind of like corked their way into success. But if you check, they were like high level government contractors. They ran their own laboratories. They, by today's money, they'd be, make an estimated couple $1 million a year at least. So to tie that into the polymath thing, it's like, well, they, you know, when you need to move in the world and you encounter different systems, those systems are also kind of built of multiple different systems. So if Leonardo da Vinci wanted to sell something to the government at the time, um, and the government's main export was like going to war or something,
Mhm.
I mean, you already need a certain variety of knowledge in terms of business and then economics and then the actual design and engineering. And then it's almost like you said, we all kind of do it anyway. And so a question might be when people recognize these polymaths, it's almost just because of the magnitude of effect.
Mhm.
And it has sort of that genius flavor attached to it. But I think one thing we could maybe aim towards is that it's more accessible than people think. And actually, I would say still necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. So bringing things to history a little bit, because you're mentioning a few people. When people think of polymaths or the Renaissance man, yeah, they think about the Renaissance. So Leonardo da Vinci, etc. But the reality is that it's a much more fundamental thing, and it's from the beginning of history, like from the you know hunters and gatherers that necessarily had to be polymaths to be able to survive and subsist in that survival economy. They had to know how to hunt and weave clothes and make baskets and shoes and stuff. Everybody had to pitch in to the tribe in order to thrive. Um, but moving on to like once civilization has started being developed in ancient Greece, ancient Roman Empire, you still had this necessary generalism. So there's this famous scene in the movie 300, yeah, with Leonidas shouting, "What is your job? What do you do for a living?" And everybody, they're a fisherman and they're a cobbler and they're all sorts of these trades. And then his magnificent soldiers, the mythical Spartans, they are just warriors, right? But that's not the case. Like they're also tradesmen. They had all sorts of different other skills, and they were not just trained professional soldiers because that wasn't the case at that time in history. And if you look at the professional soldiers, like in the Roman Empire, for example, what was the main discipline or the main job of the Roman soldier? Are you aware?
No.
They were engineers. They were
Mm,
construction workers. They built the roads and the forts and the walls and the aqueducts. The soldiers, their job was to build stuff. They just happened to conquer to have more space to build stuff in. The
right.
defense function that they implemented was just a consequence of needing to defend the things that they were building. But they were all laborers meant to build roads. That was their job. So everybody in society throughout history got, trained into many, many different disciplines, and some of them perhaps got specialized, but you still had a large amount of differing skills layered on top of each other to be able to develop their craft and to be able to produce the thing that they were bringing to society, right? And this only changed very recently with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and with um, factory production, when people realized that, hey, a generalist, like a regular human being that is happy and productive and minds their own business, they can produce 20 items in a day, right? But if we just split them apart
Hmm.
and each focus on their one particular thing and they just do that one thing over and over and over again, we can produce 20,000 things in a day.
Yeah, the
Or
division
there's
of labor.
And that's, a revolutionary thing. It's wonderful. And it's what has allowed society to prosper in the past 200 or so years. But it has also completely shifted the way that education functions, the way that humans
Hmm.
are raised and developed, and the way that we think and behave nowadays. But fundamentally, we still have that latent generalism. And I feel like with the advent of AI nowadays and with the fourth industrial revolution that we're going to be entering, that's going to unlock, I guess, or reorient our development back to those initial roots of artisanship, of uh, multidisciplinary expertise, yeah, and empower us to just do great things and be cool. Like I find this multidisciplinary expertise to be very, very cool. To me, a person who is adept at multiple different things at once is much more impressive than someone who can just do one thing very well. Right? Would you
Yeah,
agree with that?
I agree with it. I agree with it. I mean, you can argue it with like the Bruce Lee quote, "I don't fear the man who's practiced one kick or
10,000
10,000
kicks.
kicks
Yeah.
one time. I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times." But I do agree. I agree. I don't know how to rebut that at the moment, but I agree with your position. One thing that I think could be really useful to discuss is the fourth industrial revolution, because I think one consequence of this lack of sort of let's say polymathic transparency or something, where it's this again quirky term where, oh, that guy knows a lot of stuff, or you're a Leonardo da Vinci and or whatever, is that I don't there's almost a speculative tone taken to, oh, we're in the AI revolution, we don't know what's going to happen, so on and so forth. But like you said, this is classified as the fourth industrial
Yeah.
revolution, and there have been three before it. And this is not off of that trend. It's actually quite clearly defined. Now, I don't know, I haven't looked into it a ton. I just know what it is on a conceptual level. But
Mhm.
do you have more details about how we would define the fourth industrial revolution?
Sure. So it's kind of a meme. It's not actually defined. It's more like a World Economic Forum meme.
Well,
um,
I don't know. I
yeah,
think it is. I think if you check, there are a lot of
it is, but it's a new thing, so it's not
Google.
been established. Usually, this is something that is defined post hoc, so in hindsight, in the sense of technically we are still in the third industrial revolution with the advent of the internet. Yeah, so the first one
Okay,
was
that's
steam
interesting.
engine. Yeah, but then we had computers in general and like automation in terms of factory development, etc. And then the internet, the dot-com bubble came along in the 2000s, and now we're having AI, which it might be a bit different, it might be not. It depends, but it usually comes along with a shift in the division of labor and in the restructuring of how um, workers are deployed or how labor is deployed in the market. Yeah, and new classes emerge. Like with the initial industrial revolution, you had an influx of peasants towards the city, yeah, to become laborers in factories. So there was a huge migration of human capital into a different class of work. Before, cities were only reserved for the elites, for the bourgeoisie, right? Who were typically rich people, merchants, and people that had access to capital to deploy it. But with the Industrial Revolution initially, that allowed regular people who had no capital, who had no land, even so indentured servants, basically, to go and have a proper wage in a factory and to accumulate capital and to be more involved in the economy and actually exercise their entrepreneurial function, accumulate some capital, and become a proper business person, etc. So it allowed for some level of um I don't remember the term for it, like ascension in terms of their productive
Oh,
capability.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
Mobility looking for. So there was a new level of upward mobility from the peasantry that tended to be tied to their land, or even if they were free and owned their own land, they weren't particularly able to leverage that in a productive way, to then being able to have access to capital from the industrialists or whoever had the machinery to work and to gain a wage and to then invest back at home, yeah, and develop their household, so to say. Then came along, more development, and now we've reached a point where um, intellectual capital is going to be commodified, and it's going to empower people to deploy their energy and their labor in a different way, and that's going to completely reallocate and shift the way that labor is implemented in the marketplace. So it's hard to say what is going to happen. Like, a lot of people are talking about, oh, it's going to be a disaster, right? Nobody can do anything anymore. Uh, so many unemployed people. Yeah, automation. Like, think about all the drivers, and with automated vehicles, what are we going to do? Yeah, millions of people need to retrain and find new areas of expertise. Maybe, maybe not. They proposed a solution like UBI, for example, or
Mhm.
negative income tax or something of that sort, to give people a baseline that they can have, a safety net to retrain themselves, to rebuild new skills and find a new way of being productive in the marketplace. If we look at history, though, that hasn't really been necessary. Like, people are very adaptable. Like, if we can describe what a human being is and why a human is so much more successful as a species compared to other mammals on the planet, is because of our adaptability, right? So I feel like what AI is going to enable us in the near future is to leverage that adaptability and to very, very quickly learn new ways of being productive in the marketplace and empower ourselves to thrive and to exist. But that relies on a shift in mentality, which I'm not sure if it's going to happen. So we have been programmed very, very hard. Yeah, since the first industrial revolution, right? The educational system has been looking to develop factory workers, drones, etc., and that has been inoculated, has been established in the common consciousness for 200 plus years, and it's a matter of, can we escape that, and can we realign the educational system in a way that empowers people to, be successful in this environment? I think so. If we look at decentralized education, yeah, this type of
Mhm.
conversation, courses, yeah, YouTube, people, they look at a tutorial on YouTube and now they know how to do things and they just make things happen. You have 17 year olds with businesses making $20,000 a month, yeah, just by leveraging AI and doing stuff. So I think if we can't do that, it's a skill issue, and whoever's failing should take responsibility and get good.
There's a lot of interesting stuff that comes up from that.
Mhm.
One is that with a lot of the innovations or advancements that you described, with the ability to commoditize knowledge, to
Yeah.
put it simply, there's kind of a information subjectivity crisis
Hmm.
where because the, let's say, quality of information, I don't think is as tangible, and I can't perfectly define what is high quality or low quality information. I haven't thought it through that much yet, but I do know that there needs to be an objective quality measure for information, because if you go into this type of knowledge economy and assume that all knowledge has a fully subjective value, even though it's representing something that's objective, if you were to track down the tail end of it enough, I think you run into a lot of problems. And I think that's probably what people are struggling with right now. A good example of this is the creator space. The courses, the coaching, the online communities, or whatever. Because what is the sort of core ethos that's usually advertised about that is everybody has knowledge that has value, which I agree with. I don't disagree with that as a thesis. And then they go, so you can go monetize it. So anybody could monetize their knowledge.
Hmm.
I think that's true, but I think that what's going on is you're taking something that's like a polymath skill set to on the execution end. So you need to know so many different skills
Yeah.
in this bucket. Your skill stack is so varied that there's like a misapplication of the processing of your knowledge into something monetizable. And you run into that imposter effect thing. I'm not going to go through the whole recap of why it's not imposter syndrome while we're talking, but
Imposter phenomenon.
uh, right. I'll plug it. If anybody wants to understand why it's not a syndrome, just read my article about why it's not a syndrome. But you run into this imposter effect thing where because the steps are not so clearly defined, it's not so clearly defined how you go from knowledge or information as a resource to monetizing it, that uh, you just feel tempted to say all of these slam statements and big promises that you've heard.
Hmm.
So you'd think, well, I have insight about this, and it loosely involves business. So now I have to promise people that I'm going to make them $15,000 a month and get them 20 leads and clients and all these things. And that's not authentic. That creates, as far as I could see, the inauthenticity. And so I've almost been pivoting in the opposite direction when I feel that way,
Hmm.
as a mild tangent off of that, where if I feel like I'm tempted to make a claim, it's like if I'm writing the purpose playbook, which is to uncover your purpose and um, express it into the world in the form of meaningful work, right? One temptation would be to say, "Oh, well, that you could make money and you could do this, and you'll
Yeah.
just have this, alleviation of some psychological condition." And I'm like, "But I'm not comfortable with that." So actually, the truth is, this is not meant to create a transformation. To be honest, what
Hmm.
it's meant to do is give you a framework of understanding that you can apply to your life to build skills and build, let's say, model whatever area of the world you're going into, which
Right.
is still compelling, but it's more authentic and I feel comfortable with it. Or like with the Living Internet and the Future Proof Creator Summit there, the ethos behind the Living Internet is basically creative agency, social agency, and economic agency.
Hmm.
So trying to apply those things to the
Right.
creator space.
It's not
And
out, right?
no,
It's about purpose.
right, it's not about what?
It's not about outcome.
Right, right. The outcome is more of an external practical aim you kind of need. But if you don't have the drive to execute the actions, you're never going to do it.
Yeah.
So it's just it's a multivariate problem that is not, and the variables are not being clarified. So people subjectively think I could just put this information anywhere at any point, and they usually just skip to trying to sell something that doesn't mean so much. Uh,
Yeah. Outcome.
cre- yeah, exactly. And so creators so a great example of that is that people think that they can't succeed online because they, let's say, don't have the right offer, they need copywriting, or they need to post more, and all of these very stereotypical behaviors. But if you look very simply by percentage, there's a lot of people who do that stuff, and it
And
does
still
not
don't.
create a right, it doesn't create a result.
Right.
And it's at the percentage where it's like, all right, well, we gave this to 100 people and it didn't work for 90% of them, but they did all the stuff. So, what are the variables that are missing?
Hmm.
And there's basically two that Jesse, who I think is still here, kind
Yep.
of came up with that I like a lot. And one is that they give up. So, if you give up, it invalidates any process
Right.
that you might be trying to optimize. And the second one is they do not have the ability to form relationships. So you could do anything. You could pump out thousands of pieces of content a day, but if you give up or you can't form real relationships, you will not convert that into anything meaningful.
Right.
And so that's the whole point of that convention in that angle is to
Yeah. Social agency. Okay. Yeah.
correct, is to give people a social backing so they don't give up, and also the social backing to build the real relationships so that way you actually have a, let's say, a foundation to do all of those other tactics and strategies and things like that.
Hmm. Yeah. That's very interesting. Um, I'm keeping things intentionally very vague with my action smithing.
Mhm.
So you look at my tagline, it's the ultimate means to the ultimate end.
I like.
So it's whatever you want it to be. Because what it is ultimately about is that it's a process that is going to empower you to craft your own outcomes. So I can't promise you any particular outcome, but I can tell you that if you learn these things and travel on this path and complete this journey, you're going to achieve whatever you set out to achieve, whatever you're capable of achieving. You're going to realize your potential and you're going to self actualize. That's the promise. But then what that means on a specific level, personally, is whatever you want it to mean. Okay. Like action smithing is not my journey, it's everyone's journey as long as you are a human being who acts, which in my philosophy, that's kind of a definition. That's like the axiom. That's what I'm starting from. So
Mhm.
everybody is a human being who acts. Therefore,
Yeah,
everyone is an action smith. They just don't realize it yet.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a good description for actionsmith. So, an actionsmith, if we had a swordsmith, they create swords. The human being creates actions.
Right.
Is there like a actionsmith workbench?
There is. It's called your mind.
And how would one? Is there like a model of the mind from the actionsmith perspective?
Um, can you elaborate on that question?
So, like, if we analogize the action as like a as
Yeah,
the
swing with
sword,
the hammer.
and the mind is the workbench, what would the hammer be? Like, we you have your
Thinking.
thoughts,
Yeah.
focus, attention.
Yeah. So those are components. So concentration, I guess, would be the energy that you pour into the activity. So if you read my initial essays, I have like 6 foundational pieces of content, and in 4 of them, I am talking about on forging the chain of grit. So one of the pillars of action smithing is resilience and persistence, and
Mhm,
I synthesize that as grit. And in order to succeed on the path of action smithing, you need to forge the chain of grit, which is basically your habit chain. It's the standard routine activities that compose your lifestyle and your identity. And you forge the chain of grit with constant activity, with intentional rewiring, reprogramming of your brain, if you will.
mhm.
We are, we're hardware and software. We have our body and we have our mind, and we have control over both of them with our will. And that's what I would describe as the mental model. Yeah. So you have will that is then activated, it's put into movement by your desire, by your intention, and that is transformed into agency. And agency then gets institutionalized, systematized, and it becomes structure in society that can affect other people. It becomes meaning and purpose. Yeah. And it evolves into various different things, and then it collapses over time because the action smith is dead and can't influence it anymore or maintain it.
That's very interesting. That reminds me, there's something called I took a picture of it the other day while I was at the house of a mentor. It was on, like, a chart he made, and it was called Naples something, and at the center of it was will, and then there were some sort of concentric circles going out of it that I'll send you. It's a picture on my phone, so I don't wanna press the home button on the
Right.
wrist 'cause it'll end the call. It might be an Egg Naples configuration or something, but if it's not that, uh no, it's not. But, what it reminded me of is that I was looking at the cover of Dan Koh's book, like, a year ago, like, The Art of
Mhm.
Focus, right? And it's, like, the concentric circles. And that made me think of, like, what's a more complete sort of breakdown of that because it doesn't include attention.
Mhm.
And your attention is very, very powerful because it's sort of the precursor to your focus. And you can also develop the breadth of your attention to encompass more things at one time, and then your mind will kind of auto process those in a certain way. It's just like almost operating it more consciously builds that
Mhm.
as as almost like a muscle. And if you did concentric circles, you'd have something like consciousness on the outer end where it's sort of not material. Then you'd have awareness, then you would have perception, then you would have attention, and then you would have focus. And those are very, it's in that order. So consciousness is like it exists. You sort of
Yeah.
detect it exists, but you don't even have to be aware of it necessarily. Awareness is more explicit. Perception's even more explicit. Attention is even more explicit, and then focus is very targeted. And
Hmm.
the action smithing thing reminded me of that breakdown. I asked the AI, I'm like, listen, ChatGPT, is this accurate the way I'm using it? Tell me if it's tell me if I'm using the wrong terms. And it liked it, so I'm counting that as counting
Yeah.
that as a, you know.
AI is a very good confirmation bias machine. Th- that's what I use it for. I'm
It
like,
is.
okay, I've just come up with something. Is this correct? And then it's like, yeah, this is so sophisticated, amazing. You're the best. I love it.
Right, right, right. You have to tell it. You have to be like, tell me, give me the counter arguments to this, you know.
Yeah,
And speaking of that, AI, I well, like what you said before, how AI will boost people's ability to. Um,
there's one
I
caveat
think
to
it's
that.
good. Yeah. Wait.
Critical thinking. If they lack critical thinking skills, it's going to destroy them. It's the disaster.
Yeah, I think we could transition into maybe some of the pitfalls of AI because it's kind of interesting. And one is what we just mentioned, where the way I've put it, I made a YouTube video about this one time, and I actually still agree with the opinion, which is that AI is actually kind of useless for most people
Yeah.
because they don't have anything to use it for. And there's a similar point that came up yesterday in a group call I was in with like Noah Vincent and Jesse and Hussein. Nobody will know those if this becomes a famous, talk, but that's fine. They can go search and they can ask the AI. Maybe they'll know.
I know all of them. I'm following them. Check my Substack. They're in my list over there. Find them. Sub to them.
But so I was talking to them, and shoot, what exactly was the point I was making? What was this an analogy for with the AI?
You're talking about the pitfalls of AI, and that's
Pitfalls of AI.
people
Oh, the
people
critical
use it
thinking.
for.
Oh yeah, they don't have anything to use it for. And so Noah was talking about productivity systems and how to organize your knowledge. And he mentioned a super useful concept of having an inbox
Mhm.
for everything that you write down in a day. And then you use tags to sort of sort it. And then you do a weekly review, I guess, to kind of process it, which was cool. And I got, kind of put into it and I realized it could be kind of useful for me the way he talked about it. But people fall into a trap kind of where they think that a productivity system or a content organization system will actually like auto create all of the stuff that it's supposed to process.
Yeah.
And so with the AI, it's kind of similar. Like people like, oh, AI automation. Oh, the AI can do this. But they're missing the raw data or the raw resource to
Yep.
actually use the AI for something. And so what winds up happening is that it would appear the LLMs are designed almost as a party trick. So if you say anything to it with its default instructions, it's going to give you like a 20 headline response with like 10 or 15 questions, either indirectly or directly, just so it's impressive looking.
Hmm.
And that's one thing that kind of gatekeeps AI, I think, forthrightly. Another thing that I want to ask you about with it is, do you think there's an issue with almost a dilution of the information quality in the AI because
Yes.
its training data is not necessarily curated? I don't actually know how they curate the AI training data, and if
They
it's
don't.
learning from right, and if it's learning from the interactions with people,
Not as
I,
much. So if you look at how they train it, they don't really let it. I mean, they have fail safes for pollution, so they don't refeed the outputs back into the AI, because if you do that, it's going to basically inbreed, and it's going to become mentally, yeah, destroyed. So there are various techniques to prevent degradation over time. But in terms of the context that has as training material, it's basically everything. So like all the toxic stuff on Reddit, for example, is fed to AI.
Right,
Um,
right.
all the stupid answers on Quora and Yahoo Answers and stuff is fed to AI. All the smut books of like literotica and stuff goes straight like the most degenerate things you can possibly imagine are in the AI's context. So you need like it knows that stuff. You can't avoid it. You just have to
Yeah,
compartmentalize it yourself with the right prompting to get the stuff that you want, or further train it to fine tune it to particular use cases. But
yeah,
yeah, over time is going to keep degrading because what's happening is a large proportion of content by people who are not capable creators, yeah, but they are empowered by AI still. They magnify the volume of content they produce that is low quality or mediocre. Let's not call it low quality. So AI tends towards the average generally. It's like an aggregator of information. So you just keep feeding it more and more average slop, and it's going to produce more and more average slop. It's going to average towards the mean, which is garbage. Like look at the average person and what they spout, right? They're not very eloquent. Let's put it that way, right? So that's what it's trending towards. But that doesn't mean it's not capable of um, elite level of output. You just have to make it ignore or make abstraction of away from the average mean stuff. So if you narrow it down on the elite level of thinking, it still has that context as well. But we need to have mechanisms in place like outside of the AI ecosystem to curate information and to teach the AI through context that this information is trustworthy and this information is slop. So when you tell it use the trustworthy information, it knows to exclude the slop, right? And you were talking about this earlier in the sense of I don't remember the words that you were using, but the idea that um, knowledge is subjective and the objectivity of knowledge,
yeah. There's
right?
like a subjectivity crisis when it comes to information and the
Yeah.
conversion of the knowledge into something
Okay, so
use.
the way I interpret that idea is that there is an additional demand for experts, for trustworthy people that can curate information and can not be the AI average. That can be a point of reference for the AI to then output high quality content. And there's a crisis of idols, for example, of heroes, of role models. And people right now, we don't have that sort of tradition anymore. It's not, you don't have like apprentices with a mentor in an artisan shop, right? Where they're learning a trade directly from a mentor. Having access to mentors is very difficult in general. And education has been democratized to a certain extent. Like you go in a classroom, there's 30 people. You go to university, there's 200 people, right? And there's
Mhm.
a lot less of this direct interaction, this direct um, trustworthiness of knowledge. But that's not a problem. That's an opportunity, right, for the right people to stand above others and impose themselves as an authority on a particular field or on a particular subject or with a particular personality and carve their own corner of this knowledge economy for people to then aspire towards and to adopt that information. And AI is going to allow people to be like, hey, give me a summary of this entire person's worldview, right?
Mhm.
And their top 15 best articles and podcasts and content, right? And it's going to allow people to much more directly receive mentorship from people that they don't have direct access to, which I think is
Right.
a very
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I was taking. There's a lot of free courses on. Like, there's a free course. Harvard has a online course platform. They have a lot of free courses on it.
Yeah.
And one useful course I took on it was rhetoric, which
Mm-hmm.
is a top conversation for another time. Another one though was about education, like modern education. And there was a four types of education that they described. And so on like a vertical axis, it was hierarchical at the top and distributed at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the, horizontal axis, it was collective and individual. And so in four quadrants, you would have hierarchical individual, hierarchical collective, and then distributed individual and distributed collective. And and one of the evolutions that comes today is there's a big increase toward both distributed individual and distributed collective learning, whereas a hierarchical approach would be more institutional. The distributed approach is like social media, and learning is actually much more pervasive now.
Mhm.
And I think that's an interesting thing that's going to evolve because, I mean, really, as a human being, the only thing you can do is learn. That's your main thing, and questions facilitate that also. And so you sort of, that type of maybe discrepancy, you could call it, between, all right, we have all these super powerful tools, we have AI, we have the fourth industrial revolution, right? We're going to have robots automate everything and we're hit the singularity and the whole, 9 yards. It's a very big thing. It seems very extravagant, right? If we just build a big enough data center in space, we might have artificial general intelligence. But I saw an article about that. That was the plan, to start building the data centers in space now. But one thing this is emblematic of is a misconception I've been stating very frequently, where we mistake intensity of a problem for the size of the solution. So we assume, like, so let's say emotionally, you assume if you have a big emotion, that requires a big solution. But in reality, the solution to something that's intense can actually be very subtle.
Right.
And so I think in this whole information crisis, meaning crisis, purpose crisis, we're trying to find big solutions, but the solution may very well be something subtle, like, hey, refine your questioning
Mhm.
process, right? Or I believe it's some very simple adjustment because you run into a trajectory problem when you're able to spin up information this fast.
Yeah.
If you have an idea and it just throws the idea from stage 1 to stage 20, and now you need to, like, parse through every part of it and figure out where it's weak or strong. It's like that thing, you've heard, if you're like one or 2 degrees off, you want to
Mhm.
go in a straight line, yeah, but if you're 1 and 2 degrees off, you're going to wind up way far off. And so I really think I almost would advocate for a slower starts based on that logic in a lot of cases.
Okay. I think what you're describing is chaos.
Yeah, that's pretty chaotic.
Yeah, but the way I see chaos is that it's a good thing. Chaos is opportunity. Chaos
I
is
agree with that.
what empowers creativity and what lets people innovate. So, yeah, it's going to be chaotic. People need to be careful and they need to develop the wherewithal, the discernment to narrow their frame and to find their order within the chaos. And that's like a personal thing, but I think it's doable. But that's why I mentioned critical thinking earlier. I think what is required to not let that line go way off into
Yes,
space is critical thinking. Like you need to be able to stop. Wait a minute. This is veering off into Narnia. I need to calm down. I need to reassess. I need to realign with my goals, my vision. What am I actually trying to accomplish? And what you're saying earlier with people's inability to do anything with AI. Yeah, tools in general, not just AI, but like everything, are leverage multipliers. Yeah. So if you get a shovel and all you do with a shovel is create a hole and then fill the hole back up and then make another hole and then fill it back up, you don't produce anything. It's a waste of time, right?
I mean, but you use the shovel though.
Use the shovel, yeah, sure. But like you get what I mean. But if you use the shovel to create a ditch that flows water through it, and then
Yes.
you have irrigation, that's a wonderful thing. It's very valuable. It's the same with AI. Like you need to use it for something. If you multiply zero, you still get zero. But if you multiply
Right.
something intrinsically good, yeah, you're gonna get a
Oh,
bigger good.
that was one thing I wanted to mention. Noah mentioned a term yesterday called Gates or Gale's law, and it's
Mhm.
not, if you Google Gale's law, it comes out as like some American Supreme Court law. So you have to Google Gale's law, simple systems, which is GAIL''S. And what it is basically saying that all complex systems that work are built off of simple systems that work. And
Okay.
it's this, and Noah made a very strong point regarding that. He was talking about productivity systems, but I think it's generalizable to a lot of things. Is that you should avoid trying to design things to handle problems that you don't have yet.
Hmm.
You should design things based on what's already there, and then as new things introduce, you address them and
You
solve it.
iterate. Hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's very applicable to this AI usage thing. Like it's an amplifier, but if you don't have a simple system that works already, it's not going to go well. And that's like it's a very easy to misconceive. It's very unintuitive to build simple systems when you're aiming for the outcome of a complex system. It's like if somebody
Hmm.
sees a business, they see Elon Musk has Tesla, or they see that Steve Jobs has, built Apple, and they see these
Right.
huge complex corporations. They want the result of that. The problem is that those were built on functional, simple systems that worked first, and they were
Hmm.
slowly, almost systematically complexified
Yeah.
uh, into those sizes. So if someone tries to design the end first, it doesn't work. You have to start simply, and then you have to build up from that point. And even with a personal brand, or let's say people writing on Substack, you know, I just think the steps we need to that most people are stuck on are smaller steps than
Yeah.
they might realize.
Yeah. Like getting started.
Yes.
That most people are stuck on the first step, which is literally just getting started. And
And if you can't get started, you can ask a question. You don't actually have to.
yeah,
It's a very powerful thing. You ask the right question and you get started.
yeah. And it can be like the smallest thing. Like why? There's this book
Yeah.
by I don't I think Sinek is his name, Gary Sinek or something.
Simon Sinek?
Simon Sinek, yeah. Start with why. And
Yeah, yeah, that's his book, I think.
I like that. And usually whenever I am thinking about, writing a new essay or starting a new project, I usually ask myself, okay, why am I doing this? What is the purpose? What is the meaning of this? What is it going to accomplish? Does it help me? Does it, like there's a lot of, consequences that can sprout from that. And I think it's very powerful. Um, a lot of people they don't ever ask why. They just go with the flow or they just follow their
Yeah.
programming.
I also don't it's kinda hard to ask why also. I've been refining my ideas on how to write more. I've been a little bit more open to philosophy. I think for a while I was very anti-philosophy as a concept because the majority of the people who reference or engage in philosophy are actually just, like, going in circles.
Mhm.
Like, they're back referencing philosophies that were essentially modern frameworks at their time, and they're taking them and, like, applying them today in the Reddit comments section to win arguments or something like that.
Right.
When in reality, like, if you take Aristotle or someone adjacent to him, his principles are underpinning the modern development of many systems in the modern world, in terms of science, politics, writing, a whole bunch of stuff. And so the context for philosophy from that angle, I'm starting to be a little more open to it, almost as a tool that developed the sort of way of modern um, thinking that we have. And when it comes to starting to write, I'm I'm saying this because I discovered this was my problem. It's a struggle for most people to write because they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So they say, I want to write an article about, let's say, authenticity. That this was from a conversation I had with someone, but I won't say who. They want to write an article about authenticity. And they said, I don't know how to arrange it. I don't know how to structure it.
Mhm.
I said, well, I think the reason you don't know how to structure it very simply is because you don't know what you're talking about. So they were like, what do you mean? I said, well, what is authenticity? And they thought for a second, and they made up a definition. I said, but see, here's the thing. You didn't invent authenticity, right? So I would do these four things. I said I would first check the definition of authenticity, just like the dictionary definition, then look at the etymology of authenticity, then look at some of the, let's say, if there's any research, like sort of scientific research on authenticity, maybe even philosophy of authenticity, and then see if there's any books on it. And she Googled the etymology right after I said that, and it taught me something immediately. which is one of the meanings for authenticity, is consistent with the origin.
Hmm.
So if you're trying to be authentic, it would mean you have an intention, and your action is consistent with the origin.
Yeah.
So it's more about alignment, right? And so it's almost like the first step is learning. It's not trying to figure out a copywriting framework or something like that. I actually think on Substack, there's almost a Ponzi scheme for the performance of copywriting content
Hmm.
because I think people see it. But you can find certain posts on Substack or X, any of the short form platforms, where they will take two different accounts will post the same post, the exact same
Yeah.
post, and they both get likes. And I think everyone who likes it is another one of it's like the copywriter army, basically.
Maybe I've seen that happen. I don't know. Like, I don't actually engage with social media. Um,
It's
so
funny, and you're
it's
a very
alien to me.
actually a quite a good copywriter. So
Yes.
you can take a what is your angle on the sort of superficial, quick fast acting copywriting that you see
I think it's
online?
vacuous and a waste of time. Like, to me, copywriting it has a purpose. It's meant to drive people to action, right? Like, you have a product, you want
Mhm.
people to benefit from that product, you need to communicate its value and address the objections and make it easy for people to understand why it's valuable for them. That's what it's about, emotional and logical argumentation. So, in the same sense, good copywriting for, like, on Substack and philosophy and stuff would be for communicating ideas and getting people to adopt ideas and then follow through on those ideas to act upon them. I see some of that. I mean, it depends on how, like, who you follow, what you curate. There's a lot of valuable things in this ecosystem, but there's also a lot of fluff. And as you've noticed, people copy pasting from each other and regurgitating the same information over and over again. And you've got these gurus, the fake gurus that have never done anything in their life. They've not, business, but they talk about how to start a $20,000 a month business. Like, okay,
Right.
because they just saw someone else do it and they just copy paste
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, mm, what I think adds an extra layer to it, though, speaking of authenticity, is the personal experience, right? And the story behind it, the backstory of who is writing it, where is this experience coming from? I think that's what makes it actually good copywriting. Because if you look
Mhm.
at the best performing advertorials, for example, the best performing sales letters or VSLs or whatever, they tend to be great stories. They have, a proper narrative arc. They have a conflict. They have a conflict resolution. They have something emotional going on there that people find compelling and they relate to, and then they feel compelled to engage with that further, which involves buying the product or signing up for the thing, yeah, entering the course environment, whatever. But, like, there's a next step that comes along, which is the next chapter of the story, and it can be the story of the founder or the creator of that framework or system or whatever. um and even for, like, regular businesses, it can be the story of the environment, like the physical branding of the location. You go to a Disney World. Why is it so popular and so expensive and tickets are insane? Is because there's a very, very powerful story built by copywriting over 100 years of incredible movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, they leveraged other people's IP and stories, but whatever. But it's the same sort of thing. And what people are looking to do now is they're looking to get the same effect without understanding, that ethos, that essence of the storytelling part.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. You're hitting on a very core point that I just feel I guess I feel somewhat passionate about it because people there needs to be a development of the substance
Yeah,
behind what you're writing. Like but what goes on is there's this obsession with like frameworks, like the PAS framework or the HSO framework or Pastor or whatever copywriting
yeah,
frameworks. And it's like it, like you can't just put a number in a sentence and call the subject a secret trick and that'll just get people to, you
yeah,
know, get the attention. And to your point though about these stories, the actual highest performing content in the world in terms of writing, are film scripts and music.
Hmm.
Yes, there's other
Yeah,
elements to them, like sound and visual design and all that. However, if we're looking at the actual highest influence, highest impact writing, it's actually not copywriting, or in that sense. So that sort of, I think, goes to illustrate the power of a story and
yeah. I,
even the
I would
hero's
say,
journey, right? Most films are hero's journeys.
yeah, I would say it's the power of emotion. Yeah, if you think about films and music and
Mhm.
photography, it's about arousing certain feelings, not necessarily about the words being said, but the emotion being
I mean,
felt.
it could well, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that
The words
that
the words are a means to the
yeah,
emotion in
exactly.
the
Like copywriting is salesmanship in script, yeah, in print, and you can have salesmanship in visuals and in tones, yeah, via tonality. Like I can sell you on something without saying anything of substance by just asking questions in a particular way and evoking a particular mental state in a particular sequence of emotions that make you want to commit and do the next thing. And
Mhm.
then at the end, I ask you, okay, do you want me to help you with this? And they say yes. And then, okay, sign here. And then they sign up, right? But there's no copywriting there. There's no frameworks. There's no structure. There might be some structure, but usually it's a conversation and the structure is all over the place depending on the other person and what they care about, right? But it's like what you're looking to do is communicate. Yeah, copywriting is about communication and content in general is about communication. And what people are doing right now, the fake gurus, is that they're communicating unoriginal thoughts without emotion. Yeah, it's just information. And as we've mentioned before with AI, information gets more and more commodified now, and it's no longer compelling because it's the
Right.
same as people.
Yeah.
So I've noticed this, like 10 years ago or whatever, in certain industries that were a bit more sophisticated, like further along the curve, um, they were very jaded in a sense of they've already seen everything all over it again. Like they know all the tricks and stuff. Like it doesn't work. So you need to innovate. You need to bring new things in to capture their attention and to get them to engage with what you have to say. And social media and stuff is still a little bit behind the curve because you have like a huge inflow of mainstream people that haven't been at that point of being bombarded with advertising. Yeah, and they've not
Mhm.
been targeted because they haven't had um I don't want to be rude, but like the financial muscle to be a target for proper advertising, like high quality copywriting and stuff. But because that information has trickled down, so to say, into the mainstream, now everybody knows copywriting. Yeah, 10
Right,
years
right, right,
ago,
right, right.
when I was first looking to get a copywriting job, there were no copywriting agencies in my country. There was no such thing. I was like one of the only three copywriters in the country. Is insane. And now everybody knows copyright. Like now you need to know copywriting to be a business owner of any type. Like even the local brick and mortar random people that just have a mom and pop store, they understand what copywriting is and they write posters and ads and stuff. It's been so generalized and commodified, and that's a good thing. That's wonderful. That means people have more knowledge and more opportunity to do things better. Yeah, but to bring back to the idea I was saying, it's saturated the mind frame of people, and it's progressed more areas of the world of society to this level of sophistication where it just doesn't click anymore. So now they don't care so much about all of these things, the standard frameworks, the clickbait, right? Titles and headlines and stuff. The psychological tricks fall flat, but the foundational principles of what copywriting is built upon, which is, psychology and influence and persuasion, those are still the same. It's just that these people copy pasting each other. Yeah, they see the structures because those are copy pastable. They see the form and perhaps even the function, but they miss the substance, which is the emotion and the persuasion and all of those things.
I think that the copy and pasted structures are effective copywriting for people who like the structures. They're a fan of the frameworks. They're
Sure.
like, "Yay." Yay, yay, bulleted list. Yes, three things. They're like, yeah, I write three things,
Hmm.
and they do, you know. So it's just an interesting adjunct. I will mention this because we kind of got to the topic, but copywriting is actually just a diluted form of rhetoric. And
Yeah.
when I say rhetoric, I mean like Aristotle's rhetoric as a concept and principle. And one of these themes, like going back to the basics, not even basics, but this can segue into kind of a synergizing point for this whole conversation. Because one of the things that floated in my mind would practically, how would someone go to try to be a polymath in that sense of the word, that you're well versed in a variety of domains, like you have some understanding of all of them. And I think the aim to do that would be to go to first principles. And what do we mean when we say first principles? Because first principles is one of those terms that you sort of intuitively have a meaning of it, but if you do look it up, y- you don't actually find a lot of super solid sources explaining what they are. So I'm going to try to now. This could
Hmm.
be refined, but first principles, probably you could start chronologically. When did this thing that you're looking at first come into existence?
Hmm.
What is the first recorded memory or history of it, right? So if you take writing, it might be, you could actually push farther on the copywriting and rhetoric frame and say, when did writing first come? And you could kind of get the first principles of that. Why did they use it? How did they use it? So on. And sort of maybe start to try to track the thread of what's going on there. But with copy, with the art, with persuasive writing and speech, because Aristotle describes rhetoric as the art and science of persuasion,
Hmm.
persuasive speaking or writing. Um, that's kind of the first principles for a lot of the, for not even a lot of, for most of the academic, um, sales, marketing, communication that we're doing today. And if you look up, let's say, the five canons of rhetoric, CANONS, you'll find it basically is a much more first principle version of every copywriting framework. And if you look up the composition of a classical rhetorical argument, again, it's just the core roots that all those things are built on.
Hmm.
So one of the things I want to try to do is create like a rhetorical writing type of
Okay.
guide, because it's a lot easier to understand, and it's translatable to speaking also, the the principles of it. But
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on first principles as a sort of seeking point for the polymath thing? Because I think what it does is it's central. When you go to first principles, it what you hit the, let's say, the organic polymath effect, the natural
Yeah.
the one that's out of necessity,
Yeah.
where if you're going to the first principles of a point, you're probably going to actually be looking at a bundle of topics at that first principle point. And then you're going to start to realize that a lot of the division you see in the modern institutions between different subjects is actually a little bit hyper specified or artificial in a sense. And those things actually have a lot of overlap. And it's
Yes.
that overlap in the first principle layer that creates the effect of a polymath, where, from, if you're looking from the outside, you think, oh, well, they know all this stuff about all these different things. But to that person, they're not different things. To that
Yes.
person, they're the same thing. You're just like, what are you talking about? They're not different. This is all the same. And that can look very eccentric
Hmm.
if you don't actually see the first principle point.
So that line of thinking just now, wonderful. It resonates a lot with me. So I can tell you how I got into the idea of action, just for context about all you've said right now. So I literally started from first principles, trying to understand how things work. Because I had a bit of an existential crisis, and I didn't know what I was doing, and everything was a disaster. And like, what am I supposed to do? And I literally spent like 2 weeks going from first principles to rebuild my worldview, rebuild my understanding of life. And I reached a variety of conclusions, about freedom, about liberty, about what I want from humanity and society and the universe, et cetera, et cetera. And then I realized, okay, well, in order to achieve these things, I need to study certain things. I need to understand particular things. So out of consequence, in order to achieve my ideals, my goals, I had to again go from first principles and figure out certain things. So in order to learn copywriting, for example, what I did is I took a course on how to reason and argue.
Ah,
Yeah, from
that's
Duke University.
basically rhetoric.
Yes. So like argumentation is important, but not just in the logical sense. That's mostly about the actual like the logical
Mhm,
implications and how to reason in a logical sense. But then I dove deeper because I realized, okay, this is incomplete. This is not enough. How do you then influence the emotional side, and how do you reason
mhm,
the other facets of those ideas, and that progressed into persuasion and influence and um, sales and other things of that nature. And eventually, I reached to humanity and economics.
mhm.
And I got to the idea of liberty, and I got to like the Austrian School of Economics because I reached certain conclusions and I looked them up and I realized I'm not the first person to come up with these things. That's usually the reality. Like rarely
Yeah,
you innovate. So I was like, okay, I've found some cool ideas. Who else has taught these ideas before? Oh, this guy and this guy and this guy. Oh, these guys are all in the same, you know, area. They work together. They're like students of each other. What is this? And then I looked into that. And I was like, oh, great, more ideas that are
right,
cool
right,
and
right.
similar on the same tangents as what I was thinking of, right? And things evolved, and what I realized is that the study of action is like just a higher level degree of economics. So like this is a bit fringe, okay? Like not everyone agrees with this, but in the Austro school, in the Austrian philosophy, you have praxeology,
Mhm,
which is the study of human action, and economics is a subset of praxeology, because all that is implied, like all the laws of economics and all the social effects that you see in society or in a market, are a consequence of humans acting in the market. And if you understand why humans act and how humans act and behavior, you then naturally end up with what happens in the market. And this then is a consequence of like more fundamental things like physics and neuroscience. So
mhm.
I do those as well and try to understand, all the fundamental different things. And eventually I reached econophysics, which 15 years ago was like not much. It was very
I've never
basic.
heard of atomic physics. That's
Uh,
crazy.
Yeah, so it's very, very cool. It's following the tradition of like these,
Right.
multidisciplinary. We're going to, about polymathy. So um, the 80-20 thingy.
Yeah, like the Pareto
Yeah,
thing.
the
I think it's called the
Pareto.
Pareto principle.
Yes, the Pareto principle. So Pareto was a sociologist, sociologist who basically was a polymath, and he was looking at society from various different lenses, and he noticed this pattern across multiple different environments, contexts, etc. And he kind of put the foundations of this multidisciplinary way of looking at society via complex systems, and that evolved into the social application of complex systems, which then evolved into econophysics. And it's very cool to me. The cool thing about it is that you can basically use thermodynamics, for example, or like various ways of understanding complex systems, and look at human behavior in an environment, like in a nation or
Mhm.
continent, as particles behaving within that context, the complex system. And you mentioned, Gall. It's not Gale, it's Gall's law.
What's
Yeah,
pronounced Gaul?
that,
Maybe,
yeah,
well, that might have been known as French pronunciation.
probably. So how systems really work and how they fail, and he studied complex systems. So I wanted to get into it on that, but I'll let you keep going.
Yes.
Um, so to me, it's like the epitome of understanding the world to me, like it's understanding complex systems. Yeah, that's what we're struggling with right now
Mhm.
at the highest levels of physics, like with quantum physics and um, we've advanced past relativity, like trying to like all the cutting edge things that we're trying to do relate to understanding complex systems. But as you said, to understand complex systems, you first need to understand the simple systems
Yeah.
that build them up. Uh, and but not necessarily. Like we have figured out ways of gleaning insights from within the context complex systems by looking at temperature, for example. Yeah, like temperature is just a measurement of how much stuff moves in an environment, in a space. Like it's literally a measure of movement. People don't
Hmm.
think about it that way. They think about it, it's hot, it's a feeling,
Right, right.
cold. But it's
Yeah,
literally
quick,
just movement.
quick, cool
Yeah.
add, like something similar to the temperature thing. A knife. The reason a knife blade cuts is because the narrowness of the blade concentrates pressure
Mm-hmm.
on a point, and that splits the
Yeah, of
molecule. So it's funny because slicing, we don't think of it as a concentrated force of
course.
pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But it's like concentrated force. The temperature thing as movement reminded me of that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things like these. And ultimately, it's a matter of energy. Yeah, so temperature is a measurement of energy. Energy is a measurement of movement, of how much stuff does things. And if you look at the foundation, at the fundamental reality of universe, you have action. So the description of like how light moves is described based on action, which to me I found very interesting. I learned this a lot later, but like
Mm,
as you look into all of these different things in a multidisciplinary polymathic way, you just find so much overlap that most people are completely unaware of. And
right.
it's like they don't even like between hard sciences, so to say, like physics, maths, etc., and soft sciences, sociology, economics, etc., there's a huge rift, historically speaking and traditionally. Like the two branches hate each other. They don't respect each other, and they don't communicate with each other because the soft people, they don't do actual science. It's not real science. Yeah, they don't
Yeah,
understand. They're just making stuff up, and that is true to a certain extent. Like there's a lot of crap science out there, science, quote unquote. Um, but in the same sense, because of that inferiority complex, the social science people also hate the hard science people. They think they're elitist, and why are they not included in the conversation? And why do they want so much experimentation? And
yeah,
it's all a conflict. And there's this massive tension between the two sides, which, in my opinion, is a terrible drain and weight on human progress and innovation. And if we
yeah.
were just more interdisciplinary and we understood that, wait a minute, like we can take things that we've learned from the hard sciences and apply them to the soft sciences, and then we can take things that we learn from the soft sciences and apply them to the hard sciences. And this applies in every different domain. Like the best way to innovate, like in marketing, for example, I'm a marketing expert. That's mostly what I do. Um,
So
just a minute.
we're good.
Yeah, yeah, we're good. We're good. So the main way to find new ways of selling and marketing and making things work is to look at what people are doing in a completely different industry, completely different environment. Like
Yeah,
apply B2C things to B2B and see what happens. And more often than not, they work really well because nobody has done that before. Because the B2B people focus on B2B, and the B2C people focus on B2C, and they don't communicate with each other. So it's just, and this applies to every single discipline I've noticed. And if you look at, there's this phenomenon, because we're talking about
mm,
polymathy, um, in terms of the skill ceiling and the potential of a human being in a particular discipline. And the phenomenon is that someone who starts their life as a generalist and then specializes later in life reaches a higher skill ceiling on average than someone who specializes from the beginning.
mm.
And I'm not sure exactly what the reason for that is. The research is open ended, of course. But my impression is that it's because they simply have more context and they can
Yeah,
pull insights and understanding from more different things that is useful to empower their particular thing that they're focusing on.
yeah. I agree with that. The example of taking stuff from other multiple industries, Jay Abraham is a very good example of that. If you because like that's his whole schlick is like I worked in all these different places and they didn't realize that one of them did this and the other one did that. And the other thing I thought of was that in terms of being more interdisciplinary, like Descartes. invented the Cartesian, coordinate
Yeah.
square, but he's also kind of one of the biggest names in philosophy, right? And I think that trend holds for that sort of time period. There's also an interesting rabbit hole there to dive into of, we're very centralized on the Greek polymath
Mhm.
concept. I wonder what the Eastern equivalent
Well,
to that
so
is.
in Japan, for example, samurais, they had to learn, I think it's called the seven arts, or there's a number of arts. Um, the seven virtues of the Bushido Code,
Hmm. Okay.
which,
You got to read the Seven Virtues now,
yes, but there's like,
so we can be Bushido samurai.
yeah, I'm not super familiar with this, but in any case,
I'm gonna
for
check.
them to
I'm gonna
be a
check it out.
proper member of society in their class, they needed to learn how to paint, like brush strokes. Yeah, they need to learn how to write poetry. They needed to learn rhetoric. So they had to be polymaths to be respected in society. And I'm sure the Chinese had a similar sort of thing.
Mhm.
They were very class divided, and it was a matter more of roles. Like the soldier class, they had their own things that they focused on. The bureaucratic class, they had their own, more scholarly things that they focused on. But they had a polyvalent, multidisciplinary way of living life within those particular roles. But there's definitely a lot to explore there. In terms of polymathy, one of the most prolific regions, eras, whatever you want to call it, of generating polymaths and geniuses was the Islamic Golden Age. So around like 800 current era in the Fertile Crescent and like the
Mhm.
Northern Africa region. Um, those are the people who invented mathematics. Yeah, the guy algorithm is named after. So all the AI stuff that we have now is all because of some Muslim guy in the Islamic Golden Age who invented the algorithm.
Wait, there's a algorithm is named after a guy?
Yes, I can
That's
tell you his
fantastic.
name. I have him here.
John
Al
algorithm.
Kharizmi. Al Kharizmi is his name.
I can't spell that.
I typed it in chat. So
That's crazy.
uh, around 800 after Jesus. So polymathy and the Renaissance man, so to say, was not just a product of the Renaissance age. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're familiar with that because we are based on the European
Right.
culture and that type of upbringing. So we have this European primordialism and um, absolutism, even if you will, because of the imperial age and because of the propaganda of nationalism. And so a lot of it got diluted in the past like 200, 300 years. But if you look at history as it actually is, and you make abstraction of the cultural baggage that you start with in school and stuff, you realize that, wait a minute, that's not how things are at all. Like there's a
Well,
lot of
yeah.
stuff all over the place. And like
Yeah.
one of the you also have to look at things that are not exactly written. So one of the most impressive things to me, if you look at successful cities, which I want to eventually establish a free city, like a special economic zone, and develop that stuff. I'm not going to go into that, but maybe another day we can talk about liberating humanity and stuff. But by studying, civilization and humanity and human action, how human prosperity and thriving happens. Okay, because the natural state of the world, the universe, and humans is death and poverty and suffering and stuff. Yeah, and war and whatever. That's the natural state. So if you want to stop that from happening, you need to understand, how does it not happen? How do you construct something else, right? And one of the most impressive examples of this is in um, ancient Aztec culture. They had a city built in the jungle with 1 million citizens, like bigger than Rome, bigger than London, bigger than
Mm.
all the cities for like 2,000 years afterwards, with irrigation, with sewage, with like hanging gardens on top of a river. Like the the level of sophistication in terms of engineering and culture and development was something incredible. The problem is that we just don't have written records of what those people taught and what they created, and it got
Right,
lost over
right.
time. But like this is, a tradition that has spanned humanity across cultures, across geographies. It's not just an ancient Greek into Italian development thing, right?
Right, right, which is actually a good touch point for the Renaissance man
Yeah,
archetype. Well,
that's why I call it the universal man, because it's
the
universal.
universal man.
Yeah,
We've evolved. The
yeah,
universal man. I like that. Yeah, because I think, you know, sort of like you just did, when you understand that, what you just said about an Aztec city, it gives you a whole different perspective on modern society
yeah.
because you realize, like, one metaphor for this is like anything that you're detecting in your thought, probably you could trace back to some point where it was designed as information. I think, you'd have to test that with a bunch of different concepts and thoughts and so on and so forth. But a good example would be something I noticed and I'm writing about in the Purpose playbook or guidebook, I might call it a guidebook, is how in the world, as contrasted from the earth or the universe, the world referring to society, corporations, the human world, we kind of suffer from a form of economic blindness in the sense that, you know, you live in an economy and sort of by definition, your activity in that system is economic activity,
Hmm.
but we don't register it as such or understand what that means because we're focused on money. But money is a generally accepted token of exchange that represents an underlying resource. It represents the value of an underlying resource or set of underlying resources. So if you're focused on the money and you haven't referenced a resource, you say, I want more money. Well, that would mean you need to develop more resource.
Yeah,
And so I found that that's actually, I noticed that in people's personal finance, but that's actually a popular concept in classical economics called the veil of money, where the existence of the monetary system can actually obscure the observation of the underlying economic activity.
hmm,
And I was like, oh, I didn't come up with that. Like I noticed that, but that's already a pre developed um, concept. And that's so consistent with
yeah,
stuff. And then to something that obscures that, and this is very unfortunate. I think this is kind of a big problem. People just misuse terms. So, like, there's the imposter syndrome thing.
yeah,
Well, if you take 30 seconds to Google imposter syndrome and like you click the Google definition that's, oh, well, it's referring to imposter phenomenon. And then you find that it's not a syndrome by any criteria. So it's not implicit. It's not something wrong with you. The original authors are not happy that it got called a syndrome because it obscures the meaning of what they were talking about. And
yeah,
they're actually trying to say that the imposter phenomenon or effect is a sort of societal effect that's pressuring people into becoming an imposter. And that another, and so the term is instantly misused and misconstrued, and people build philosophies and frameworks
yeah, yeah,
based
yeah.
off of the misdefinition. And another fun one, you've probably heard this example. People will be like, if you want to you could sell anything on the internet. You could sell underwater basket weaving, even. And have you heard the underwater basket weaving
I have not.
reference?
No.
So I've heard it's referenced two ways usually. It's underwater basket weaving as a statement of like a useless college class, but it's also been, I've heard a couple people say it in regard to online business and, kind of you can have your one person business monetize anything if you're interested in it. Like other people also be interested in underwater basket weaving, which is supposed to
Mhm.
reference this like fringe,
Okay.
super
I mean,
niche.
honestly, to me, it sounds pretty cool. Like, if I
Well, well,
had
well,
excess
no,
money, I would probably get
well,
a,
no,
a
no, but
class in
but the
underwater
thing is
basket
this.
weaving.
The thing is this. If you look at actual underwater basket weaving people that exist,
Hmm.
what it is they sell their baskets, and it is just a very common technique to weave these materials underwater
Mhm.
because they become more malleable.
Yeah.
It's not actually like you're
It's
scuba
just basket
diving.
weaving. Yeah.
Right, but
Okay.
if you yes, it's just basket weaving, but if you look it
Okay,
up,
okay.
there's all these YouTube videos of people scuba diving and weaving the
Right, right,
basket,
right.
like but then I looked at this actual person who does like, sells underwater weave baskets on Instagram, and on their website, you just see, like, a basin of water, and I'm like, "Oh." So
Yeah.
so it's like to say, like, this stuff gets overblown in a way that's really not conducive to understanding. uh,
Mhm.
you can't backtrack first principles from misconceptions like that, it's very difficult.
Yeah, that's why you gotta go the other way around. And I had a rant recently, and it triggers me. So I really hate how people denature words and they lose their meaning and it becomes something else. Like it's stuff like um, irregardless or saying literally when you mean figuratively.
How does
Stu-
irregardless and regardless have they mean the same thing, though, I think, if you look them up.
they do mean the same thing, which is mind blowing because they are the opposite thing. Like, but whatever. So what the example that bothers me a lot because it's leveraged in a malicious way in policy to constrain human activity and development and stuff and whatever is the idea of monopoly.
Mhm,
Um, so monopoly means you have only one seller. Okay, but if you look at antitrust law,
mhm.
it's not against having one seller. It's about random other things that are just an arbitrary way of constraining
Right,
anyone
right,
you
right.
like, right? Like it's just very arbitrarily deployed in the name of monopoly because when random people think of monopoly, they think about that guy is winning too hard. That's what monopoly
Yeah,
means to them in a colloquial sense. And I dislike the fact that there's a distinction between colloquial terms and formal terms. And the fact that when I have a conversation with someone and I use the definition, the meaning that is in the dictionary and it's right there, like I have to actually define my terms every time because they don't actually understand what the word means. And I have to
yeah,
like this is the meaning, this is the etymology, and I am the pedant, right? Because I try to stick to the actual meaning of the word because they completely misinterpret it because they got this, common random misconstrued meaning that is in their society on the internet or whatever. Usually, native speakers, they don't have to learn it in a formal way. So they don't engage with the actual topic. They're
right.
just very superficially engaged with that idea. And the superficial engagement is usually completely derailed from what the actual meaning is, as you've noticed with the imposter syndrome thing. And it's the
Yeah,
same with like economic theory, mainstream economic theory, and the mainstream understanding of how economics works has nothing to do with reality. It's completely deranged, in my opinion. A lot of people are going to disagree with that, but people don't even use the terms right. They have no idea what the words even mean. Like, how can you have a coherent understanding of a subject and a conversation on a topic when everybody uses words in completely different ways? Like, it's impossible. So I
right.
don't know how to resolve this. It's just very frustrating to me. And it's a constant thing in so many different fields. So what I'm doing as like I've explored this for like I don't know many many hours to try and find solutions. Like, do we fight to regain the words back? Like capitalism, for example. Capitalism is a derogatory term that
Yeah, it's like a
everybody
pejorative people use now.
yeah to mean evil money grubbing people. And they look at corporations, which are monopolies empowered by the state, yeah, with a literal monopoly charter, which have nothing to do with capitalism. Like they have nothing to do with the free market or with, you know, private activity, which private, if you look at the meaning of the word private, it means small. It's like a family maximum, like two, three, five people. A corporation with 100,000 employees is not private in any sense of the word. But in their mind, when you have corporations handling power and whatever, that's the private, that's the capitalist class and whatever. So the current understanding of economic terms is so corrupted to a point where you cannot have a reasonable conversation with anyone. Um, Unless they are, of course, also formally initiated and they've studied the subjects and they've gone through a lot of work to understand, what the words actually mean. Which, if you're not, an economics major or someone who studies economics for fun, that's never going to be the case, right? And
Right.
so the option would be to fight directly and be like, this is what the word means, stop using it wrong, which doesn't usually work. Like if you look at the debate between the descriptivists and the prescriptivists in like translations and in dictionary writing and stuff, it's a never-ending battle that it's never going to be resolved. Um, so the alternative to that, which is what I'm trying to do, I think, is to just invent new words. Just like let these people take the words, like they've corrupted it. It has a new meaning now. Language has evolved. Okay, I'm gonna make my own word, and it's gonna mean what I want it to mean. And have the person who doesn't understand the terms and the formal framework or the theory behind it ask the questions, right? Oh, what does
Mhm.
that mean? What is action smithing? Well,
Right.
great to ask. Because if I talk about self-actualization, they're gonna have so much baggage and so much connotation from other people that have said
Yeah,
random
yeah,
like
it
control.
triggers a lot of, yeah,
Yeah, like you
stuff.
can't control what people have in their head already from words that are commonly used and other people have espoused and preached, let's say. So I think the only way to be accurate about what you're talking about and to get people to actually understand what you're saying is to have them start from scratch and ask the question, okay, well, what does that mean? What do you mean by that? Elaborate. Because these, these terms, they're usually syntheses of like very complex concepts that have many different layers and many connotations. And that's why you need a formal understanding of the topic to actually understand what the word means. And people don't have that. So they just take the very superficial first layer of thing and they have a knee jerk reaction or like an emotional attachment based on what they were programmed to react with. And that's all there is. So how can you have a conversation with that context? I don't think it's
Right.
possible. So I just want a clean slate and I'm inventing new terms and I'm redefining things. And like, if people don't like it, great, let's have a conversation. And you can bring your terms, I can bring my terms. You can find, hey, actually, we're talking about the same thing. Isn't that cool? Like the mind blade stuff and the action spinning stuff, it's kind of the same thing. Awesome. Now, instead of being enemies fighting against each other, we're friends, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. That was my first instinct solution is either redefine the words, which I think can actually be a subtle and useful tool to slightly develop the meanings. So it's like nuanced in a new way, and that's kind of compelling. And inventing new words is because also who's the arbiter really, like, yes, we collectively agree upon the language, but what is the real arbitration of, oh, this is what this word really means versus it doesn't really mean it? I wanted to double click in on something you said, which was descriptivist versus prescriptivist, because I've been saying something for the last couple months, and this might not be a totally accurate statement logically, but if it comes to something like ADHD, which is, I know it's a popular topic, and this is very common with most diagnoses of things. A diagnosis is descriptive. So
Mhm.
it's describing something. It's not
Yeah.
prescriptive. And I've added to that statement, it's not prescriptive and it's also not a causal statement.
Yes.
So the language surrounding these things of like, well, I have ADHD and it caused this X, Y, and Z,
Mhm.
but it's not an entity. So
Yes.
it's not something that exists within you that operated with agency to cause something.
Right.
And I think that that misphrasing causes a lot of problems that are, like, totally unrelated to the underlying
Yeah. It's
topic. So
like
I wanted,
self
yeah,
programming that you do.
right, because it's a mischaracterization of the information you're being given. It's just and that's not what it means. It's a
Yeah.
shorthand phrasing, but the shorthand phrasing, like imposter syndrome, is immediately misleading, and will nobody will parse through to, like, reverse the meaning. It's not how we absorb information.
Yeah, words
So,
have a ton of power, and people misuse them
yeah,
with themselves first and foremost, and it's a terrible like the outcomes that come from that are terrible. So with the
yeah,
ADHD thing that you just mentioned, um, people, yeah, I have ADHD. Now this is part of my identity. Now, therefore, because I have ADHD, I am going to do these things, and they reinforce themselves, and they don't even um, entertain ways of resolving those traits. They become part of who they are and they accept
mhm,
them. Or they don't just even accept them, but they project them, yeah, into their existence. Whilst the correct way of looking at it is the descriptivist way, which is I do these things, therefore I have ADHD. ADHD is a consequence of these behaviors, which may have other causes. Yeah, like mm, hormonal imbalances
Mhm.
or trauma or
Right, it probably varies per person.
genetics. Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah,
different things. Like a syndrome uh, is a description of
yeah,
a collection of symptoms,
mhm,
right? But what are those symptoms? Are they true? Are they not? Where are they from? Are maybe there's a an overlap of multiple syndromes at the same time, and you just miss attribute it. Like there's a lot of different things, and people nowadays, a lot of people self-diagnose with random things. Like if you go on Tumblr, which I don't, but like it's people's favorite pastimes. Everyone in their description has like all their mental illnesses and all the
yeah,
things that they self-describe with, and those are part of their identity. Like instead of like back in the day, going back to the polymathy stuff, people identified with a role in society. Yeah, they or with a job, a craft that they had. I am, uh, I am Jesus, son of whatever, the carpenter. Yeah, that was what it was. And then based on the activity that they had,
mhm,
they got a different role. They became the Messiah, and people came and treated them that way. Someone was born as a prince. They have to act as a prince. They have to go into the balls, and they have to learn etiquette, and they have to dance and do all these things that princes do. Because one day you're gonna assume the role of a king, and the king needs to treat people with justice, and they need to do these things, and well, like the prescriptivism came from the role they had in society. Well, we've lost those roles because of industrial revolution stuff. People got standardized, right? Individuation stopped happening. So people no longer found their own role in society and developed their identity and became their own individual being. And instead, they became this amorphous cog in the machine who is whatever. And then they found new things to latch onto, like mental illness. And now I am this ADHD person who likes music of this type. I'm a metalhead and I'm a fan of this particular band. And there's like
mhm,
all these quirky personality traits that define this identity in a very strange way that is not, historical and is not really
yeah.
productive, let's say. But that's because people lack meaning. There's no central avatar, let's say, or archetype that they can define themselves. So then they latch onto whatever they can find, right? Anything that is around them, like cultural stimulation.
An interesting point about the meaning thing. Well, first, I'll give one more example of this descriptive versus, I'll say causal. I don't, I need to look up what prescriptive exactly means. I feel like it's more of
To
a,
prescribe.
right, it's
Like,
more about this is what you should do. But I
yeah.
think what's going on is they're mistaking the descriptions for causal entities or something. And it's also a weird thing that happens with diagnoses. Like, let's say somebody drinks a bunch of energy drinks. They eat a bunch of junk food, which it also has a stimulant effect on the body, inflammation, whatever. They vape nicotine, another stimulant, right? And then they feel anxious. So they go to a therapist or psychiatrist, and on paper, and some of them do this, you're supposed to parse out what the distribution there is. You're supposed to parse out if this is caused by environmental factors or if it's some sort of implicit cause, right? However, because of a bunch of reasons, whether it's poor training, poor education, um, sheer volume of people they need to serve, whatever. Usually, what happens is it's like an assessment. Oh, well, you're anxious. You have this anxiety. That's generalized anxiety disorder. The second that label is given, all of those causal factors I just mentioned are now they just don't exist anymore, and they have the anxiety. I have this disorder, but this is like embodying the description as a causal entity creating the thing, and I think that's very pernicious in how people process it, and it leads to the stuff that that you mentioned. There was something else I was going to pivot to, but I forgot for the moment.
Right. How are you on time, by the way?
I figure the next thing I was going to say was going to be a creative point we could wrap up on, just because that way we
Okay.
don't get
So let's circle back. So we started this
yeah,
conversation with the conference, and
yes,
I don't know anything about the conference. I know a little bit. I know that Dan Coe is going to be there, I think.
hmm
and a bunch of other people are going to be there, but I don't know what it's about, why it's a thing. So tell me more about that. Where did it come from? How is Jesse James Carver involved, for example? And who are the cool people involved? Why should we care about it? And maybe
Well,
someone see you in Vancouver.
well, I would say the core premise of it is it's designed to give people those three things I mentioned earlier, which is creative agency, social agency, and economic agency. Meaning what? Well, you need to have the conscious ability to create things in order to make content, or in order to write, or make videos, or do graphic design, or whatever it is. You need to have the freedom to output whatever creative thing that is. And after that, you need to be able to form real relationships with people. In other words, you need social agency. So you can't freeze after you created something. You need the feedback, social feedback. You need to ask questions to get information. You need to be able to build relationships. It's specific to the creator, it's directed at the creator space in this case, but you need to be able to build relationships in order to have a good life outside of that, to have romantic relationships and friendships and all those things too. And then to make it sustainable, you need economic agency. So, can I take a part of this and effectively uh, make it sustainable, whether that's through monetization or some other dealing? Make deals out of it. And so, the aim of that we renamed it to the Future Proof Creator Summit is basically give people that. And it was inspired by the fact that Jesse basically met Dan Coe on a trip he was in to the desert, right?
I think I saw a picture of that at one point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Very
he just
orange.
happened to be down there because Jesse's all over the place all the time. And he met Dan and they talked. And then Jesse had this idea he should do an in-person convention. And I was like, hey, why don't you start with a virtual convention? This seems like a lot of work. And he's like, no, 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 it should be in person. And I'm like, I mean, if that's what you want to do. And we kind of ping-ponged from that and it built up. And Dan was very interested in it and he said he would speak. And I think that when it comes to the ethos of someone like Dan Coe and a lot of the other speakers on that list, like that guy, there's someone on the speaker list named Brian Meyerhofer, and he shares a similar word breakdown process in his content and stuff. I've seen him talk about specific word usage. I heard him mention, the etymology of a word when we were on an X live space a couple weeks ago. You know, so everyone on the list kind of shares a similar foundation of, I would argue, this more realistic and pragmatic view of sort of recognizing the online space as a business problem more than a writing framework problem or something like that.
Mhm.
And so the two things that you we want to get into people from going there. Yes, there's some stuff about how to make an offer, there's some stuff about maybe AI, whatever the speakers choose to talk about, the workshops we wind up doing at it. But at a core foundation, the core root value is that when you have a group of people you are with, you are way less likely to give up. You get
Mhm.
the feedback you need. You have the social support, which you're built for. You can ask the questions to get the answers to the frameworks that are normally confusing. So the first purpose really is so you have an outlet to not give up. And that's it's sort of an amplified version of that because of the in-person aspect. Now there's
Mhm.
also a community to go with it to try to extend that more. Because after you decide you're not going to give up, and these are harmonious, if you can't build real relationships, it's over.
Right.
You could, and I've seen a couple people. One of them I went to high school with, but I've seen people with over 200,000 followers on their social media platforms, and they can't make a dollar. And a lot of the time, they'll just get like hate comments, and they're called grifters and things like this. And so they never built a real relationship with the attention they got.
Right.
And so nothing came of it in that respect. And Jesse happens to be a very good archetype for how much you can actually leverage the relationship itself because doesn't have a big following at all, right? He hasn't posted a ton of content. he hasn't had like that claim to fame thing. He just put himself in the right position, met Dan, and then he reached out to all these other guys. And through pure like social skill and relationship building, he managed to get all the speakers, on board with the thing. So if I had to sum it up in two words, what you would get from that, and there's virtual tickets for it also, but is basically a reinforcement to not give up and a dramatic increase in the ability to build real relationships. And then on top of that, there is the generic, like some generic offer frameworks and all of those type of things. But the unique part would be the actual foundation beneath it.
Mhm. Very interesting. And where can people find out more about it and get that ticket?
They could go to thelivinginternet.com,
Okay,
which,
thelivinginternet.com.
which might be in my bio, and if not, I'll type it in the little chat.
So it's now the Future Proof Conference
Future Proof Creator Summit.
Creator Summit. Okay, wonderful.
Fancy, right?
Fancy, fancy.
Internet
And what is your role in it in particular? Like, what do you feel
uh,
proud about?
strategy.
Strategy. Okay.
Basically, strategy. We could go in depth, maybe more on strategy in another call. And there's also some other cool stuff that came to my mind during this conversation that I think we could really, dig into on another one of these.
Hmm. Sure. I mean, that would be a wonderful topic for another day. My two roles that I have in my signature in my email, my business email with people that I work with is partnership director and business strategist. So
I removed I just put in my bios right now. It's just strategist to be
nice, nice.
enigmatic.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So, and what about you mentioned the purpose guidebook, if you're renaming
Yeah,
it. What is that? Where can people learn more about it? And what did they get out of it?
that is how to uncover your purpose and express it into the world in the form of meaningful work. And the easiest way to describe it is just to give a clean definition of purpose, which, which is purpose is the unique way that a person is driven to seek fulfillment. Fulfillment is the achievement of well being and success. Well being is the effective management of your internal state, and success is the effective management of your external situation. And you can compartmentalize those two things as your world and the world.
Mhm,
So, in order to effectively um, find fulfillment through the use of your purpose, you first have to uncover your purpose in your world, and you need to understand the rules and mechanics of the world enough to actually express it.
right.
Otherwise, you're stuck. And so, what the purpose guidebook slash playbook, whatever it winds up being called, does goes through how you can sort of see a very basic foundation for a clear framework to start learning the rules and mechanics of the world in whatever area you're trying to move.
Mhm,
Then, what are the parts of your being, again, in a basic sense, so you have the discernment to differentiate your world from the world, how you consolidate experience you probably don't realize you have, get to your actual core intent behind that that'll drive your action, and then basically a basic business framework on how to implement that in there. Right now, I'm still writing it, but I'm to have like the well, the pre launch is over. The free pre launch is done. But if anyone's interested in it, they could. There's like a Google Calendar link, so I can feel very official, where you can just book a meeting and ask about it basically. But I'll have cleaner, details about it as I finish with the people I'm walking
mhm.
through it with.
Okay, very interesting. To me, it sounds a lot broader than I expected. So I'm also working with purpose, and the way I see purpose is that it's a consequence of action, right? You uncover your purpose, you discover it by
Yeah.
doing the things that constrain your perspective in a particular direction. Yeah, they orient you and they make you see the light, if you want to put it that way.
Mm.
If you look at a logotherapy, for example, like Franz Frankl, I don't know what's his first name.
Viktor
So
Frankl, maybe.
I don't know, whatever. So he's a guy in Auschwitz who
Yeah,
survived.
The Modern Man's Search for Meaning, I think, was his book.
Yeah, and he worked with a lot of psychiatrists, and I'm getting my dad to, or he's a psychiatrist who worked with a lot of survivors and not survivors in concentration camps. And I gave my dad that book to read because he's still in a depressive hole for like the past 25 years. And he lacks meaning, he lacks purpose, he lacks the ability to engage with action. And it sucks. And
Mhm.
that's a good way to get some context about, people in very extreme situations. How did they overcome it? What is the difference between survival and collapse, decay, if you will? We were talking about entropy earlier. Um, and I am exploring similar themes from a different direction, but I've ended up with similar conclusions because if we start from first principles and we look at
Mhm.
reality and how it
Right.
works, you end up with the same things that work, right? So for me, it's more about um, there's actually a branch of behavioral cognitive science, whatever, psychology, called inactivism, which
Mm.
I learned about like 3 days ago because I've been writing about agency and stuff. I didn't even know it was a thing, but as I come up with
Mhm.
things and I end up putting them on paper. I'm like, okay, who else thought about these things? And there's an entire school of thought that thinks in a similar way that I do, apparently. I'm not sure because I haven't dived so far deep into it. But the point is that through inaction, through putting your will into execution and turning it into reality, you uncover meaning and purpose. And you're talking about systems and frameworks and understanding reality. I feel like that's something, it's maybe a prerequisite, but I feel like that's also something you can do through action, in the sense of by testing reality. When you act, when you dive into uncertainty, yeah, and you find your bearings, you make sense of it all. You do that by making mistakes, by testing reality and seeing what happens, right? You fail, you succeed, and based on the feedback that you're receiving, your brain chemistry changes and you wire yourself in a particular way, right? So I'm not sure how much overlap there is, but what I'm thinking is that, for the people that I'm working with, I am more in the sense of I get people going and I help them keep going. And then I teach them how to go in a higher leverage way to have more impact, right? There's various things. So I met with this lady who focuses on trauma and not specifically therapy, but like people, veterans in particular, who are struggling with, the collapse of their worldview after a traumatic event, for example, or after the experience of being a veteran.
Mhm.
Uh, Terrible situation. Um, I don't deal with trauma, but I'm looking to overcome trauma through action. Yeah. There are people who tackle it directly. I look to tackle it indirectly by getting people to do things. So I'm curious, from your perspective, this direct versus indirect thing, with purpose in particular? Are you looking to tackle purpose directly and conjure it up and produce it? Or are you looking to engage with reality in a certain way to build up understanding and to build up the power to produce that purpose indirectly?
So, first, what you mentioned about the uncertainty thing and kind of the exposure that I was driving yesterday or the day before, and that it came to me that the type of thing you described, you could describe as a high growth environment.
Hmm.
And I thought that it's wise to encourage people to be in high growth environments. So we're in agreement on that. With purpose, I basically ripped the core of the purpose section from my mentor's book about intent. So I'm not going to go too deep into intent, but the thing is you didn't choose your purpose. It's something you uncover,
Hmm.
which sounds it's probably some of a very woo woo thing I pivot to in the the framing of it, but the people are confused, and I thought like this for a while, but it doesn't really track like this. Your purpose is uncovered, but the creation of it into the world is um
Inactive.
designed. It's by design, right?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So those things are getting mixed up,
Hmm.
and they're getting mixed up because passion is the first representation of your intent. a passion you have. And a passion you have would be something that has kind of stuck with you for your whole life. It's something you're always constantly drawn to in terms of an activity. And the example I use is this. Imagine somebody has the intent to um, get closer to nature and also help other people share, the beauty of nature with other people. Well, that could be an intent, but there's multiple ways that can get expressed. So, for example, someone could start a garden, and that's one way that you could become
Right.
closer to nature and share the content. Someone could go on a hike. Someone could become a marine biologist, right? Those are each passions.
Yeah.
The
Someone could
problem
wrestle
we're facing,
alligators and crocodiles.
right? Exactly. There's really there's genuinely a very wide variety to the range of it. But if you try to pivot from your passions, now we have a problem because your passions, in a practical sense, in the world, which is the economic world, human society, may conflict with what the market demands.
Mhm.
So your passions are not a good thing to monetize, contrary to popular belief. It's actually high friction to do that. Your intent, because it can be expressed in multiple ways and you will feel fulfilled if it gets expressed, you can pivot from very freely.
Mhm.
So by understanding how to come in touch with your intent, it's basically purpose is a shorthand to say the intent that is driving your action in the world to produce what you're finding to be meaningful.
Right.
But the meaningful part and how you produce it is developed and designed. But the intent itself, the subtle intent behind it is
Yeah.
not. And so if you can align those things, which is what I'm writing about how to do in that, you wind up with a very smooth
Mhm.
translation from your sort of innate drive into expression in the world. And I want it written in a way that it's not contradictory, let's say, with something that you just said. Because what that is what I'm saying, I believe, is a good foundation for, s- you know, putting yourself in high growth environments where there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of pressure, but you're still conscious and you don't see it as a bad thing. You're not overwhelmed.
Mhm.
It's not unhealthy. I think, yes, it's a very broad framing for that. I'm not sure if that answered your question. I don't remember your question precisely. It was about direct or indirect
Yes.
tackling
So, like,
purpose.
yeah, yeah, like, are you tackling purpose in, like, conjuring it up in an intentional way? So you're talking about intent, or is it
Yeah.
more a product of all the other things that people are doing intentionally?
Yeah. Purpose is essentially a summary term for
Mhm.
it's the unique way you're driven to seek fulfillment. So purpose is a composite.
Okay.
Your purpose is a composite of your intent plus the way that you're executing that. So it's super subjective in that
Right.
sense. And it's variable also, it can change.
Yeah, and he can not exist. He can be lost.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it requires I think, some conscious maintenance.
Alright. One last touch on this, and we can end it off on this. What do you think about devotion?
Devotion, that's very interesting. Devotion in what sense?
In the sense of a full commitment to something, like your purpose, yeah, or a discipline, devotion to mastery in a particular skill, or devotion to a person, like unconditional love. And I'm thinking it's very so. I'm wrestling with the idea of consistency, right? So one of the pillars in action smithing is to persist, and
Mhm.
the reason I talk about persist as opposed to be consistent is because you can persist in an inconsistent way, in a variable way, right? But what matters isn't that you stick with it, 4 hours a day, every single day, but it's that you never give up on it, right? And
Right.
that's a matter of devotion to me. If you devote yourself to a particular cause, even like you mentioned about passion, it's the thing that you return back to over and over again. So you might forget about it for a moment. The flame might wane, okay, but the kindling is still there. And when you relight that flame, it's still the same flame, right?
Mhm.
So that's how I perceive devotion. But more than that, it's a matter of conscious and intentional commitment to that
Yeah.
particular. or passion that you have. And I'm wondering how that relates to your idea of purpose and your playbook.
So devotion is powerful because it recruits your energy fully. So devotion is a way where you don't need to consciously direct all of your energy toward something. The devotion redirects it there automatically. So a good way to think of this is like if I might have said this to you one of the times we talked, but if somebody's acting in their throughout their day and only 50% of their actions are consciously decided by them, the other 50% are compulsive.
Mhm.
Well, the energy being spent is now split still. So that's very ineffective. And usually it's not just two things, and usually that percentage is very much lean toward the unconscious part. So you kind of have different options, and this is almost analogous to like the four branches of yoga in some sense, where it's sort of like there's karma yoga, which is yoga of action. There's jnana yoga, which is yoga of the mind. There's bhakti yoga, which is yoga of devotion. And then there's also kriya yoga, which is yoga of aligning the internal energies. And so that's a useful heuristic to understand this a little bit. And so one method is what you're saying, devotion. But what the devotion does is it removes that problem. Because if you're devoted to something, by definition, you have aimed your entire being at it. And that resolves most of the issues that that you would have to resolve differently with other approaches. Where if you did it mentally, cognitively, now you have to learn everything and sort of retain your attention on it in that way. Devotion tends to be a little bit more of an act of surrender,
Mhm.
where you are surrendering to the thing you're devoted to and giving yourself to it completely and fully that way. So I would almost maybe conceptualize it as a tool that can be very useful. It reminds, I don't think it's one to one with this, but it brings to mind the way I look at faith.
Mhm.
Um, because I think, let's say I get a cut on my arm and it heals. I didn't heal the cut. If I look at information, I come up with a new idea. I didn't come up with the idea. I'd like
Yeah.
you would say, "Oh, you came up with the idea," but how did I didn't like sit here and synthesize it, right? There's some stuff at play that's happening in almost an automatic way. And this was a big blockage I had when I started trying to do anything on the internet or anything creative or even just write, is I was afraid I would like lose ideas. I was afraid if I put out this idea in my head that that's it. I'm not, and we're not going to have another one, so it can't be wasted, right?
Right.
And in that sense, there's an aspect of blind faith that look, take your best possible idea that you can think of. Don't be afraid anybody's going to steal it. Don't worry about any of that stuff. Put it out, put it on paper, right? Do something with it. And you have to have the faith that actually that's going to make you come up with a better one next time because now you practiced.
Mhm.
And so there's a necessity of faith in that sense, but I don't know that the faith I don't think it's synonymous with the devotion. I think that the devotion might be different.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. Well, I think we should wrap it up here. It's been uh longer than I expected, but very, very insightful
Yeah, this
and
is good.
qualitative. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to the next time. I'd love to have you again. And there's so many things we could talk about. Like I could literally yap for 12 hours about all sorts of things and 12 hours your side, 12 hours my side, 24-hour live stream. Let's go.
24-hour live stream.
Yeah, maybe one day. Um, but yeah, wonderful. So check out Nick Serpico, your Mind Blades on Substack. You have a YouTube.
It's like,
You're also on X and stuff. Give him a subscribe, give him a follow, give him whatever you have. And maybe see you in Vancouver, I guess, if people are interested in that.
right, possibly.
Yeah. And for me, you can check out actionsmithing.com. And if you have anything else you want to add, some shout outs, your mentor, their book or something, feel free to add any final words.
I'm trying to work on his social media, so if I get it up enough, then yeah. But, yeah, check out thelivinginternet.com. I think it's the Living Internet Alliance on Substack also, if you wanna read a bit more about it. And yeah, yeah, I think that's basically it.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks everyone else for being here. It was a pleasure to have this conversation.
Yeah,
Peace.
thanks you for having me. I'm looking forward to another one.
Wonderful. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.